Hello you, and thank you so much for clicking play. Now I am sitting here with some incredible news. I am just from watching some great news and reading some great news online, and that is that Donald J. Trump has cut back funding to the USAID. He has decided that these organizations will not be receiving as much funding as they've been receiving, and that they will not have a heavy presence on the African continent like they have had for what seems to be decades now. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, you're probably a Westerner, this is why you would wonder, USAID, United Nations, with all its agencies, UNEP, UNICEF, UNESCO, you name it, World Health Organization, and these organizations providing aid and charity and donations to African nations. So why would you call it good news when Trump, decides to cut back on funding? Okay, you're sitting there asking yourself that question. I'm just about to answer it for you. I'm just about to tell you why you have it all wrong. You have it all wrong because of Western media. Okay, you've been brainwashed, you've been duped, you've been hoodwinked for decades. So you can continue giving money to these organizations, money that seldom ever reaches the people, the grassroots levels. That money seldom ever reaches the people in need. And if it does, it is this much, and the rest of it goes into the coffers of very greedy Westerners in cahoots with very corrupt African leaders. So Trump can see right through the nonsense. And this is why currently Africans are celebrating that finally these thieves are being asked to leave, okay? Because such organizations are there for their interests, not for the interests of the everyday African people. Myself, I'm from Kenya. Kenya is on the east side of Africa, and we've had these organizations in our slums, areas where there are slums, and in very remote areas. These organizations, we've watched them get politicized time and time again, because if you look at the areas where these organizations that have been receiving billions, not millions of dollars, we are talking billions here, billions of pounds, billions of dollars, billions of euros. If you look at the areas where they have heavy presence of such organizations, nothing much ever changes. You can just rub two brain cells together. You don't need many brain cells to see that they give this much help, and then they publicize it and put it all over the newspapers and the media, because the newspapers and the media is what these organizations know how to manipulate and be in bed with for them to continue looting. And then the damage that they do is this much compared to the help. So this is the damage, and then this is the help that has been over publicized, and then you think, oh, they're doing a great job. But if you go to those areas, the grassroots levels, nothing much ever changes. I remember having a conversation with my dad once and going like, since I was born, Kibera slums, there's a slum in Kenya called Kibera slums. It's been called the second largest slum on the African continent. Why does it never go away? I remember asking my father that question, because all the international organizations are there. Why does it never end? It is so easy and I was a kid having this conversation with my dad. It is so easy with the amount of money that gets poured into these organizations for them to just get rid of the slum and have some kind of modest, decent, modern housing structures, education, health sector. And my dad said, oh, that could never happen, because that's their gold mine. Every time they need the people in the West to continue giving them money, those are the pictures that they use of human suffering, people suffering in slums. Now, you might be thinking, but your leaders have to start fighting these organizations. And this is my answer to you. There are a lot of African leaders, a lot of them, who have stood up to the Western organizations that come there in the name of aid and donations and told them, no, you're not going to exploit our minerals, our resources in the name of giving aid. So you publicize your little help as you loot our nation. Such leaders were quote unquote put in their place. So if the leader is not assassinated, which has happened in many African nations, these are things that are public information. Go look them up. If they're not assassinated, then they will be thoroughly frustrated, because what these organizations then do is that they fund the opposition of that leader, and they create a very hostile environment for that leader to rule. And in some nations, war has broken out, and as the war is ongoing, they go in there and steal the oil. Like, it's the same script, different cast. They've been doing this for decades. They go in there, they steal the oil, the resources that are there, the minerals, they mine illegally. Let me just read you one time when they were called out by one of their own. I remember reading this on the news a few years back. When a right-wing interior minister, his name is Matteo Salvini, accused France of still being in power in many African nations, that France is still colonizing some African nations, only this time in a subtle way. He said that the EU, the European Union, I'm just quoting him now, verbatim quote, the EU should impose sanctions on France and all countries like France that impoverish, which is true. They have been taking a lot of advantage of African nations, sub-Saharan Africa, that impoverish Africa and make these people live, because Africans should be in Africa, not at the bottom of the Mediterranean. He was talking about all the boats that, people were running away from poverty, literally just, taking a chance, taking a risk, sailing to Europe, and a lot of them were drowning. And he was saying that they should be in Africa and not at the bottom of the Mediterranean. If people are living today, it's because European countries, France above all, have never stopped colonizing dozens of African countries. He said if it wasn't for Africa, France would rank 15th, thereabout, among world economies, not in the top 6. The Italian ambassador to France, Teresa Castaldo, was summoned to the foreign ministry in Paris on Monday. French diplomatic sources quoted by Italian news agency ANSA called Mr. Di Maio's, I hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly, they say that his remarks were hostile, without cause, given that they have a partnership. But this guy was basically talking the truth. He further stated, France is one of those countries that by printing money for 14 African states, can you imagine France printing money for African states so they can overtax them, prevents their economic development, and contributes to the fact that the refugees leave and then they die in the sea or arrive on our coast dead. If Europe wants to be brave, it must have the courage to confront the issues of decolonization in Africa. I mean, this guy is simply telling the truth. He got into trouble for saying that when it is something that you can prove. Let me give you a little bit of political history, something that I personally know. 1939 to 1945, after the Second World War, after 45, a lot of these countries, and by these countries I'm also referring to Austria, where I currently live. My house is in Austria, and next door to us are Germany. These countries and EU nations that are today the Schengen states, the EEA as well, part of the EEA, they had to rebuild from scratch because everything had been flattened by the Third Reich, right? After the war, there were a lot of bombs here, and so everything had been flattened. They had to rebuild from scratch. America loaned them more than 10 billion US dollars. In today's currency, that would be over 100 billion, right? They had loaned them to rebuild. Do you know that Africa gave them much more than that in the form of oil, minerals, resources, and we've never been paid back? They did not willingly give them. It was looted from Africa through colonization. Because if you look at most of the African countries, we did not get independence until way after the 50s. The war was over. Kenya, for instance, all the way to 63, we were still under the colonial thumb, the colonial rule. And they took the minerals and resources without asking and have never paid back. They looted our countries and then lied to you Westerners that, Africans have an average IQ of 65. This is why they cannot develop. And the racists were very happy to hear that. You see, we are smarter. No, you're just led by thieves who gave you a head start and who refuse to repay their debt. Okay, let's just get that clear first of all. If you look at some of the countries that are still paying taxes to some Western powers, you're like, Why is this happening? You saw the Italian guy saying, why is France printing money for African nations? I will also add to that question, why are there military bases from the West in African nations? Why are they using these organizations as a front to have spy agencies in our country that then meddles in our politics? Why? It's all about the kachinching. These organizations are there to loot and to meddle in our politics, to make sure that the leaders who are corrupt are the ones that are elected so they can continue having puppet leaders. I am glad that whoever is advising Donald J. Trump can see right through the facade. They can see that Africans are still under colonization to date. They are still getting exploited. And if you're sitting there as a Westerner thinking, so all this money that we've been contributing to all this WHO, I don't know what, UNEP, UNICEF, it doesn't reach the grassroots level. You don't need to be a genius to see it. Just ask yourself how long those organizations have been there and what has been achieved. It's little to nothing. It is literally little to nothing. This is the amount of wealth that they distribute, and this is the amount that they keep. If I start telling you what has, like, the mathematics does not even make any sense, okay? There are some nations, let me just pull that up right now. The African continent has 40% of the world's gold and up to 90% of its chromium and platinum. Think about that for a minute. Africa has always been the breadbasket of the world. Africa does not need Europe. Africa does not need America. It is the other way around. But because of exploitation, you come, you loot our continent, and then you sell back to us what you in the first place stole from us, or you paid very little for. Okay? So the largest reserves of cobalt, diamond, platinum, and uranium are all in Africa. Here's a little bit of another research. Take Katanga in the DRC, in Congo, as an example. This Congo is one of the poorest nations in the world, yet it has diamond, gold, and tantalum in huge quantities. Okay? There was a mining boom in Katanga, in Congo, under President Kabila and his son Joseph. They licensed international mining companies to tap into these treasures, okay? This generated millions for the elite in Congo, the very corrupt leaders. And of course, it generated billions for the Western nations, okay? What did the everyday person in Congo get? Nothing. Literally nothing. So that's what I was saying. Like, when an African leader is corrupted, when he is promised the world, it's like we are back to Bible times all over again, where the devil comes and tells Christ, bow before me and I will give you everything that you can see. Okay? As far as the eye can see, it'll be yours. When, figuratively speaking, the devil comes in the form of very greedy Europeans and tells those African leaders who are hungry for money and power that they will give them everything and more if they just bow before them, the people are the ones who suffer, okay? And any leader who stands up to that is normally silenced. He is going to have a pretty hard time, okay? Africa holds 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves. We are talking about minerals that are very essential for the development of electronics and AI hardware. Like, Africa is never not relevant when it comes to being the world's food basket. Yet, even as AI develops, there is almost nothing that goes back to the coffers of Africa. Africa just keeps on giving and giving. It never recedes. And that should change, because we need leaders such as Donald J. Trump, who says, okay, this is nonsense. You don't need to be on the African continent exploiting them. And some people might criticize by saying, oh, but Trump talks a lot of crap about African nations. Trump says that, those are not very good countries and he doesn't have much respect for those countries. It's okay Trump can say whatever he needs to say. I am quite aware that Trump has made some pretty disparaging comments towards countries that are developing nations, that he's not had the nicest of things to say. And my reply to that is always that Trump can have an opinion just like anybody else can have an opinion. We don't need the personal recognition or personal seal of approval from Donald J. Trump. He is not a leader in Africa. He's not the president of Kenya, for instance, where I am from. So he can have whatever opinion that he wants to have. Two things can be true at the same time. Maybe that he does not respect some of the development that Africa has made despite it being heavily exploited. There are still a lot of countries in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, that are doing very well. Maybe he's not informed of that or he does not respect that. It doesn't matter. But on the other side, like I said, two things can be true at the same time. On the other side, he is putting America first, and so he's getting rid of those organizations that Africa does not need, which is helpful to us, and we should do the same and put Africa first. We should put our countries first. It's okay if Trump has an opinion about developing countries. We don't need Trump's approval. We don't need Trump to like us. If the American government at some point wants to trade fairly with us, so be it. Now, another thing that I've seen people saying online is that, oh, you know, if America leaves, then countries such as China and Russia will be next to take advantage of African nations. That if the West leaves, the East will take advantage of African nations. Africa is rising. More and more Africans are waking up. People are seeing that this is how the world works. This is how exploitation works. So my reply to that has always been, Africa can only be taken advantage of from this point onwards, depending on whether we, the African people, allow it or not. It depends on who we elect. It depends on our civic education. It depends on, you see, all the brainwashing they did during the slave trade era, during the colonization era, all the brainwashing, at some point, it was going to be reversed. And we are seeing a lot of reversal of that. Africa does not need the West. It is the West that needs Africa. Africa is a food basket for the nation. It always has been. And if we just manage our continent better, a continent that has most of the gold and the diamonds, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that these countries are exploited, and when the exploitation stops, they will rise to unimaginable heights. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. That's the good news that I intended to share, that the ball has finally started rolling in the correct direction. We need more and more leaders to stand up to Western powers and to say enough. Thanks, and if you liked anything that you saw or heard, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Ciao!